I have taken a little bit of a break and no excuse for not uploading podcasts. So I'm excited to get back into the swing of things and kick it off with this episode. Today we're talking about perception and how using perception can change your own view of any situation that you're in and use it as fire to help fuel your goals and put you on the right track. So I appreciate you guys for tuning in, and let's jump in. Oh, it's that time again. It is that time to get after it, and I am really happy to be back. It feels good. I took a little hiatus. I wouldn't say hiatus, but just had some hard time with recording recently. I was out of the country and traveling for work and stuff, but now finally getting back into a routine. And I haven't talked to you guys since I ran the Vegas Marathon, which I talked about with Drew not too long ago. This was his big race. I was aiming to go sub 250 and didn't happen. And we'll go into that a little bit more today, but I want to kick this off by starting with the idea of perception, what that means and what we can learn from it. There's this quote from Marcus Aurelius that says, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." And to break it down, our perception is a field of vision. It's like a lens in a sense. It's pretty much how you choose to see the world. You've heard the term or the phrase, don't look at the world through rose-colored glasses, which is pretty much like don't neglect what's actually happening out there. But there is some truth to that. And whatever you want to focus on is what your life is going to look like. And there's a lot of power in this. So what we decide to focus on really shapes who we are, how we feel, and influences our actions. At least should influence our actions. I love this quote from one of the leaders of our church. His name's Russell M. Nelson, and he says that the joy that you feel in life, like joy comes from what you focus on rather than the things that happen to you. And you don't have to look too far. I don't know if you've ever seen like a family who doesn't have, all the newest toys or all this, abundance and all that, but they still find ways that they can be happy. It's probably because they focus on what matters to them, their family, being healthy, the little things that are often overlooked but produce huge results. But this is why the Stoics invested so much time and effort in trying to understand and master their own perception. You've heard it from Seneca that says, we suffer more in our imagination than in reality, which is true. Like, how often do you overthink the challenge that's in front of you and tell yourself so many stories about why you can't do the said thing or why it's out of your grasp, difficult for you to master or difficult for you to do. Like all these things that we tell ourselves, when in reality, if it's been achieved by a human being before, or you have evidence that you're heading in the right direction, then you should keep going. You should keep going down that road. And when those challenges come up, realize that that's part of the process. It's literally part of the journey. Ryan Holiday has this book called The Obstacle is the Way, where he talks about this. He talks about how pretty much the obstacles that are in our path make us who we are meant to become. That could be good, that could be bad. But whatever happens along our journey throughout life, those difficulties will shape us into who we can become. We'll go down with some of the greats if we remain consistent, if we fight our own battles and don't let anything get in our way while we do so. But the thing is, you have to remember, is perception is elusive in a sense, because you can't necessarily see something for what it is. So perception can be misleading. To one person, a situation might seem negative. To another, the same situation could appear positive. Can both be correct in a way? Probably. But one person's view can be completely different from your own. And so when we're talking about perception, you have to ask yourself these questions like, what are my values? What are my beliefs? And how can I use what comes into my way, into my life, as a way that I can grow, I can become better, and keep going down the path? Shakespeare famously wrote this quote, Nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so." So thinking about what the issues could be or could not be, that's where problems come up. And if you look at it as like, hey, whatever happens to me is not going to be good or bad, it's just going to be what happens, then that alone will give you strength to keep going. Because life isn't meant to be some simple, easy little thing to get through. Like, you're meant to try yourself, you're meant to challenge yourself and try and be a little bit better in that sense. So with that idea that there's no inherent good or bad, only the things that happen and the perceptions we bring to them. There's an event itself which, you know, could be catastrophic to you in the moment, but try and change your perception, because perception shapes the story and allows what we can do. Like, it gives us the opportunity to decide what we want to do in that situation or circumstance. So, like, let me give you an example before we go into my own. But like, imagine an employee in a company, your company. We could talk about if you're a business owner or something like that. But they make a careless mistake, and it costs you a lot of business. You lose a lot of money because of it. Seen from one angle, it's probably a disaster, right? Something you've tried avoiding your entire career as a business owner. You don't want bad things to happen. You don't want employees to make careless mistakes that could lead to not reaching profit goals or whatever that could be. And if you look at it in that way, you're going to think of life as negative. You're going to think of the situation as painful, and that's it. And you'll probably start asking questions like, why me? Why did this happen? Why was my employee so careless? Why I worked so hard for this business? Like, you could tell yourself all these stories, but if you look at it through a different lens and then try and think of it as this is exactly what you need in the moment, instead, think of it as a chance to break through to that employee, teaching them a lesson that only experience can offer. And a mistake transforms into training, and an obstacle into an opportunity. So that employee, I can almost guarantee, will not make whatever mistake that they made in the past. Because I love this idea that mistakes transform into training. So whatever that looks like for you, that's a good principle to live by. And that's where I want to start talking about my Vegas marathon experience. Now, I was pumped for this because Drew and Parker, who both told me they would never run again, decided to go and set out for their first marathon. So that's what this was on November 3rd. So we were all pumped up. I watched them train for an entire year for this moment, and it's a day I've been counting down for. And it almost felt like there was like a gravitational pull to this like moment, because all three of us had invested so much. Parker and Drew both invested in time. They put the training into fruition. They're the ones that put the work into their goal. They ate well, they trained, they recovered, they did everything that they needed to. I guided them along the path, obviously gave them guidelines to adhere to, but they're the ones that did the work. So that's what matters. And they were set up to do their first marathon, which is a huge milestone. They were training for probably the better part of 7 months. And I just remember hearing in the back of my head, every time I think about it, them saying to me, "Oh, I'll never run again." Like, Drew would always make fun of me and be like, "Oh, you're stupid. Like, why are you running?" And now he's running, so suck it, Drew. But so much happened on that weekend, and I tried my best to capture it all in words. I work in my journal quite a bit, but there's a couple things that I want to just highlight from this. So we drove up to Vegas. It was Drew, his wife, and his little son, and I. And the whole time, like, I could tell Drew was excited. I could tell Reese, his kid, wanted to see him hit this race bar, achieve his goal, and he was pumped. He had no idea what was going on in terms of like what a marathon is. But it was fun seeing him excited to see his dad work. And the night that we got done with the expo and we went to dinner and everything, we were all feeling those pre-race nerves that typically hit you. And it's one of my favorite parts of racing actually is the nerves that you feel leading up to the race. And I think that's a good thing. You don't want to be so conceited that you think that a marathon isn't going to be a challenge. Doesn't matter if you've ran 45 marathons. Never look at it as something that isn't going to test you, because I can guarantee you it will. But it was fun because after dinner, we all went back to the hotel. We laid out all our gear. We called it a night. I stayed up for my wife. She was flying in that night. And I don't know. When I see her, she has this way of quieting every storm within me. It's super interesting. But I didn't have those nerves when I held my wife. And this is just a random tangent, I guess. But as we laid in bed and we were cuddling, I just like felt the tension drain from my body and felt a steadiness that I couldn't explain. And we'll come back to Allie on this, but shout out to Allie, she's the best. But we finally drifted off, and before we knew it, we were awake at 2:30 a.m. Ridiculous. And then that's one thing I hate about marathons all the time is to catch the bus, you gotta wake up at like 2:30 a.m. Because our bus was at, I think our loading time was at 4, so we woke up. I like to wake up a little early so I can get a little bowel movement in. Could be TMI, but I don't care. And get some extra carbs in. So when I woke up, though, I was not very pleased. I had this scratching feeling in my throat, and it shot pain with every single swallow I would have. So not the ideal start. We all grabbed our gear, grabbed some bananas and all that, and by 4 a.m. we were on the buses. We were headed to the starting line in the cold, dark desert. The winds were insane. They were howling, and all three of us were feeling that knot of nerves a little bit more because we're like, oh, are we going to have a strong headwind on this? And again, fear can be a good thing. It humbles you. And so I would say you need a little bit of fear on race day to keep you grounded. But at the start line, I pulled Drew and Parker aside, told them I was just proud of them and to take it slow and let the race come to them. So we parted ways. I went up to the 3-hour pacer, ready to run my race. When we started, the cold air hit hard, but it felt good, strong. The wind pushed against us, so there was a pretty strong headwind, but I kept my pace pretty well. By mile 4, though, my lungs started to tighten and my throat started to swell up a little bit more, and every breath grew a little bit harder. So I pushed through, thinking it would eventually ease up, but it only worsened. It was like my throat was clamping down and I was choking for air. That's really what it felt like. It felt like something was in there. But we're running around mile 7 or so. We got into the city and I was running alongside some guy who, like, he was just cruising. He looked like nothing could stop him. And so I was feeling a little jealous. I was like, dang, this guy's cruising. He's killing me. And he passed me, which, it happens. You can't be the fastest in the race. Unless you are the fastest, then congrats to you. Nice work. We got to mile 9, and I rounded the corner. I saw Allie, Reese, Emily, Drew's wife, and Austin, Parker's girlfriend. They were all cheering us on. And so I did my best to, keep a strong face. I threw up a rock on sign and gave Reese a high five, trying to look like I still have it in me, really. But I would know deep down I was scared. I started feeling like I wasn't going to be able to finish this race. And I ran down a hill, and when I got to the bottom of the hill, the whole facade dropped. I stopped putting on this face, and I was really struggling, like more than I ever have in a race. I had talked about my ultra marathon where I was throwing up, but this was worse because I couldn't breathe. And I knew this was one fight my body wasn't going to let me win. And my heart wanted to finish. I really wanted to push through, but I stumbled over to my wife where she was at that same corner, and I kind of knew it was over. I collapsed pretty much into her arms, and I was frustrated beyond belief. And I felt so guilty that I was watching Drew and Parker run this race, seeing them work so hard, and yet here I am, around mile 10, deciding to throw in the towel. It sucked. I felt hollow. I felt ashamed. And I started questioning myself. I was wondering, had I lost my edge? Was I as strong as I believed myself to be? All these doubts hit pretty quickly. And that's where Allie comes back into this thing, because she's always my rock. And she looked at me and said that this wasn't my race. She said, you coached them to this point. This is their victory and not yours. She said, yours is in June when you're going to be racing against Nick Bear. So she pretty much told me that today we celebrate them and to be proud of what they've achieved and realize that this is just part of my journey. And those words kind of helped me cut through the fog a little bit, realigning my perspective and shifting my perception to really think about what was important at that time. Because this race wasn't about me, it was about Drew and Parker. And so I had to set aside my own pride and celebrate their moment rather than my own. So I pivoted. I dedicated myself to supporting them as much as I could. Because if a coach is anything, a coach is someone who, when things aren't going as planned, they're the ones who step in and say, hey, like, keep going. And so I had to coach myself in a sense. But that was a huge perception shift, I would say, from Allie, was that this wasn't the end of my story. Even though it felt like it at times, it wasn't. I was going to come back. I was going to be stronger in the end for it. Like all the preparation, all the anticipation, and all the celebration or celebrating that goes on race day, I wasn't going to be able to see all my work come into fruition at this race. But one thing that this did for me was spark the relentlessness that I had to bring back for my sub-3 marathon that I ran for Team Tim. And so instead of looking at it as a failure, instead it is a shift to think that, you know what, use this as fuel. Use it as fuel to help you become better. So when June comes and you're racing against Nick Bear in Duluth, Minnesota, that you'll have an edge and that you'll be able to push through the pain because you know everything that's gone into where you're at now. And I committed to rebuilding my discipline because honestly, I slacked off a little bit. Not in like a terrible sense, but you couldn't call me relentless. And that's a favorite word of mine because of Tim Grover's book that I read earlier this year where he talks about Michael Jordan and how he's the epitome of relentlessness. He's a man who wouldn't stop until his goals were met, until he had rings on his finger and he was celebrated as the great. So nothing could deter him. No excuse, no setback, no opponent was enough to make him stop. And so that's the kind of mentality that stops or that separates the good from the great. I could be good at running. I am good at running, but I'm not great. And I need to be relentless if I want to be great. Think about some things that you've done for yourself. Either failures or areas in your life that you wish you could work a little more on. I think one way to start is to realign your commitment. So this is where perception comes in. Don't look at where you're at as a point where you're stuck. Instead, figure out where you need to spend more time, allocate more time so you can improve the whole situation. So I would say if you want to start being relentless, the first thing that you need to do is commit to a goal. You need to choose something big enough that scares you. That fear is not a warning. It's not. It's a guiding principle for you. Your goals should intimidate you. And if they don't, you're not aiming high enough. And then I would say step 2 is just investing in that goal. So setting time daily to chip away at it, as small as you can every single day. But the more you invest, the more you'll fight to see it through. Going back to the business owner, think about them grinding towards a dream of a lucrative exit. Or the musician who's working in dingy clubs until they have the idea that they'll make it big one night. Or Michael Jordan, who was cut from his team, but he refused that to let failure define him. Instead, he moved on and he grew, and now he's arguably the best basketball player in the NBA. So relentlessness actually requires dedicated time and effort every single day. And this is where I'll admit that, yeah, I've let laziness creep in. My routine's been a little off because I've been living in Arizona. I haven't been in Utah. And with it, my drive has faltered a little bit. It's not an excuse, but one realization that I had is that goals don't wait for convenience. They just wait for you. And if I want this podcast to be successful, I have to work when inspiration strikes. Like when I have an idea, I need to work on it. I have to make it a daily pursuit and push my own boundaries of creativity and figure out where I can grow. But the same thing goes for running. I see Nick Bear's training and he works hard. He's fast. And if I want to have a chance to go up against him, it's going to require relentless drive. And with this in mind, you have to understand that life will throw challenges your way because it always does. But being relentless will help you navigate them with a little bit more strength and speed. You'll be able to be more of an active problem solver. So, for example, you lose your job, then you need to focus on hustling through the interviews. Like your life depends on it. Like, don't stop. That is your new job. And let's say I get injured, I can't run. Then I'll pivot to rowing or lifting weights until I'm healed. But the thing is you can never let a setback define you. Instead, use it as an opportunity to grow. And that's where perception comes in. Because if you look at your failures as a failure, then that's how you will see the world. But if you look at it instead as this is a setback, how can I learn and grow? For me, it was Vegas Marathon. It's like, okay, yeah, I might have been sick, but I also know I wasn't training as hard as I probably should have. And I've ran a sub-3 marathon before. And it takes a lot of work. You have to do it every single day, like I was just talking about. But the journey will demand early mornings. Whatever your goal is, it will, because you have to make time for it every single day. And that might mean sacrificing a little bit extra hours of sleep. The reward is everything, though. That sweet taste of victory that you are who you say you are, that you gave it all you had, and every drop of blood, sweat, and tears will be worth it. I can guarantee you that. So when we're thinking about our goals and what we can do to not necessarily focus on the issue, but focus on the areas of growth, there's a lot of benefit that comes from that. So it helps reduce your own suffering because, like I said, Seneca said, we suffer more in our imagination than in reality. And so controlling your perception helps you separate reality from your fears and assumptions. So that's going to reduce unnecessary stress. It's going to help you be more resilient. And when we learn to view setbacks and challenges through more of a constructive lens, then they do become opportunities to grow and not give you an excuse to be defeated. Resilience is important. Being able to fail and then bounce back is a very difficult thing to do, but it's important. Like, you've heard the term, when the horse bucks you off, you get back on. Or when you fall, dust the dirt off your shoulder. It's because they're trying to tell you that if you fail in your journey, if you fall off the horse, literally or figuratively, then the only way for you to keep going is to get back on, to not let it stop you, to keep pursuing and keep growing. Because on this journey of shifting your perception, it's going to allow you to grow in ways that you haven't before. It's going to promote your own self-growth and your own, view of yourself. It'll help shape your own identity and realign you with your values. So if you say that you're a disciplined person, but you get sick, you kind of get out of your routine, and you're like, I'm still a disciplined person. Are you? Like, shift your perception. But ultimately, controlling your own perception means mastering your mind. And this is something that we all are going to have to struggle with our entire lives. It allows you to respond rather than to react. Don't react to things. I love the rule that when something happens, take 2 seconds. Take 2 seconds just to think, or take 2 seconds before you respond or react. That'll give you a lot of power. So this, in a sense, is just training ourselves to see things as they are, without the ideas of fear, without pride, and without impulsive emotions. when we achieve this, we do gain freedom from the narratives that hold us back. It enables us to live more intentionally and more of a fulfilling life because it's not as negative as you think it is. Like nothing bad, nothing difficult is going to come with roses and, I don't know, other nice little things. Roses have thorns. And if you want that rose, you're going to have to go cut at the stem and you might get poked a little bit, but at least you have a beautiful flower. And you could focus on a rose and say, that's a horrible bush because every time I get near it, I get cut. Or you could say, it's worth it to get a little scraped to get that beautiful flower that I can give to my wife. Think about that. Man, go get your wife some flowers. It's important. But that's my message today is when things happen to you, take a second. If you need to feel those emotions, like when I was running Vegas and I collapsed into Allie's arms, I bawled. I cried for maybe 30 seconds. But after that, like I said, I committed to supporting Drew and Parker on that day. And now I have to fire myself to really see what I'm capable of, to push myself beyond my limits and to see what I can do to race as well as I can next June. Never let a failure define you. Like David Goggins' quote on he doesn't look at failure as failure, he looks at them as attempts, is a huge one that we can all take into our lives. And my challenge is if you are going through a hardship, shift your perception. See what you can do to change how you view things. And instead, look at it as a way that you can get better. Because that's what we're supposed to be doing in life, is becoming the best versions of ourselves. And if we let one setback define who we are and to stop that growth, that progress to what we know we can become, then life's going to be a sad story for you. But you have the power to change the story. You have the power to decide for yourself what you're going to do to change whatever situation you're in. So I appreciate everyone for listening. And if this helps, please send it to someone that you might think needs to hear a message like this. But until next time, everyone, keep getting after it.